I think what was super hard is having to deal with your own stuff at the same time as dealing with the teenagers' stuff. Sometimes there's just no break and you can't get away from it, which is really hard. Hi, I'm Steve Bradfield and I live in Perth, WA, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story raising teenage boys. Well, I was a youth worker many years ago and I loved it, and I was pretty confident going in that I'd be okay with teenagers, but it wasn't it wasn't always the case, because it's a different relationship. Going from being a dad with young kids that, you know, it's like they do what you say or most of the time, and if they don't agree with you and they have a cry, an hour later they'll be sitting on your knee and playing and it's all good. But it's almost like an involuntary automatic relationship. But when it becomes a teenager, it's more like it's a voluntary relationship where you have minimal power, influences or reward, and they can basically say, yeah, Dad, I think you're a tool and I don't want to listen to what you have to say, which often happens sometimes. With boys, knowing how much to let them explore, because when I'm one of 8 kids, number 7, and my parents let me explore. I go out my BMX and just ride the streets, come home for tea. I didn't have to tell them where I was every 5 minutes. It was awesome. But working that out with you guys, working that out with Mum, was actually a hard position. But I wanted to make sure that my kids, being you're one of them, actually had a bit of flexibility to be able to make mistakes. But then it would come back and bite you in the bum when you trust that you're saying, oh, I'm just going to this party, when you might not be going to that party. You could be doing stupid stuff and getting into trouble, which is a real stress. I think the transition from the child to parent relationship to adult relationship was super hard, because you don't know what you're doing. You really don't know what you're doing. And trying to navigate that super hard. Particularly, we didn't have a lot of people our age, because we were young parents. We didn't have a lot of people our age going through the same process, which was really tough. But we had a couple of really good friends that we were able to lean on. I think what was super hard is having to deal with your own stuff at the same time as dealing with the teenagers' stuff, life issues. And it's just like, sometimes there's just no break and you can't get away from it, which is really hard. I had a period where I was in my probably mid to late 30s where I went overseas with the army, and I had a very difficult deployment and it was a little traumatic. And when I came home, it just happened to be the time when you guys were going through your rebellious stage into drugs and partying and doing all that stuff, which was super stressful for Mum while I was away. And then I came back and then I was not feeling 100%. So Mum at that time really had to carry a lot of the weight, which I'm grateful for. But that is life, because sometimes it could be sickness, it could be financial matters, but you got challenges as a parent as well. It's like, how do you do that? For us, it was exercise, talking with our friends. We didn't really have parents that we could talk to about that, because they wouldn't have understood. I think just doing the best we could was really what we had to do. I think the biggest advice we got super early was make sure that you make your relationship a priority, and that's the best thing you can do for your kids. In other words, focus on your partnership or your marriage, because if your kids feel safe and secure, then that deals with a lot of issues. And if you make mistakes, at least they know they're in a loving household, or you're at least trying your best. But we would always prioritise us, meaning me and Mum, Joe, so that we didn't make it all about you kids. And the other bit of advice we got was, when 2 people are in a relationship, they're a family, and anyone else that comes along is a welcome visitor. For example, your kids, they're a welcome addition, but they're not the centre. Because sooner or later, the kids are going to move away and they're going to look at each other and go, who are you? And in our case, we tried to work on that before we got to, because the kids, you guys have been moved out of home now for 4 or 5 years. Actually, we felt more comfortable with each other to continue the next stage. Probably, some of my career choices affecting my well-being and how that's affected the family has probably been one thing I've actually wondered about, if that was a mistake. Because sometimes, the level of stress we carry at work or some of the challenges can actually have downward effects, and I would definitely say that's one of those things, and probably my biggest fear. One of the biggest traps I see for guys is just getting caught up in work, in maybe their own identity and achievements, because that's easier than what it is to do a parenting job for teenagers. It's easy to hide there and say that, I've got to be there 9 hours a day, and then when you're home you're not engaged at all. I think giving your best when you get home, but making sure you save some energy for when you get home. I think it's not fair just to just check out. I think that's a challenge when you're knackered and you're putting everything you've got into work. And when you get home from work and you've got teenagers that are giving you grief, makes you dig pretty deep. I don't think I tried to overpower my teenagers by trying to one-up them on authority, because I realised pretty quickly that that's a never-ending war. That you've got to learn to talk with them at their level and understand that they're going through just as much of a challenge as you are as a parent, trying to work it out what that means, that new dynamic. So I don't think I ruled over my kids, and actually making time and effort and becoming friends with them as adults is probably one of the best things I've enjoyed. I think one of the things I had to understand was each of my 2 kids were completely different. One responded to how discipline was in different ways than others. So I think it's understanding what your currency is for your kid, Do I spend more time with them? Do they appreciate more time? Do they appreciate gifts? Or, do they appreciate encouraging words or stuff like that? I think it's understanding what your kid's currency is and then trying to love into that or work out what that means. I think that's important. I think not being naive is to think that you're going to do amazingly much better than your parents. Where I think we might start out thinking, I'm going to get this right because my family stuffed it up with me, and I know in my situation I felt I had a very traumatic family situation, but the reality is we're humans as well, and external circumstances can change our life and impact our family at any time. So don't be naive is to think that you're going to be perfect, because you'll fall over at some stage. When I was a youth worker, I would get parents drop off kids, teenagers, and saying, we've tried everything, basically don't know what to do anymore. And we'd go away with these kids on a camp. They were mainly guys. They were awesome kids. And you heard their stories, and there were just massive problems at home, and it affected these kids, and it come out in behaviour. And when you got to know them and understood their story and some of the hurts they experienced, they're completely different. So I think understanding that we do have how we handle things has flow-on effects, and that's one of my fears. When I was being a dad, when teenage time, but I think that does affect what's going on. That's why I think it's so easy to focus on, I'm going to send my kids to the best private school because that's going to make such a big difference. But then you neglect simple things like, oh, well, do we have tea together each night, or do we want to go away on a family holiday, or stuff like that. You know, you focus on the wrong things, or you might talk to your spouse or your partner really bad and not think that has an effect on your kids, but it actually does. So I think we can spend too much time and money on things that really don't matter. Do your kids really care if they've got the best clothes or not? Do they really care if they go to the best school? I don't know.